Hi everybody, I'm Juliana Szucs, and I'm here with my friends Amy Johnson-Crow and Ann Gillespie Mitchell, and today we're going to talk to you about interviewing family. It's a really good topic for Family History Month because it's so important. I was really fortunate when my mom first started getting interested in family history that she actually took a tape recorder around and taped my grandparents and a lot of other family members, and I still actually have that tape, and so I can actually listen to the sound of my grandmother's voice sometimes, and I love being able to hear her tell the stories of how they put soap flakes on the floor to wash the floor and skated around on it, but they broke a window. Just all the fun stories about how she won dance contests with my grandfather and wonderful things. But we also got a lot of clues from them, too. She talked about how her neighbor, Mrs. Glass, would wake them up when they were children after their mother died. And so being able to identify Mrs. Glass in the census as their neighbor helped me prove that I had found them because they were using a different name. So a lot of really great clues have come out of those interviews. How about you guys? When you first started researching, who did you interview and what kind of questions did you ask? Amy?
Well, it depends on how you define getting started. When I was little, I was really close with my grandmother, and she told lots of family stories. She was really the keeper of the family stories, and so that was. And talking with her, it wasn't so much that I was interviewing her because she was just so free with the stories and with the information. She was the keeper of the family Bible, and you know, I asked some follow-up questions for things that I had found in there, but you know, started with my grandma, and then, but that was when I was really little. But as I got older and started actually focusing, you know, hey, let's actually research the family tree. By that time, my grandmother had already passed, and so I was left with, you know, interviewing mainly my parents. You know, really talked with them. It was a little bit hard because on my mom's side of the family, she didn't know a whole lot, so not a whole lot of answers coming from mom. But as I have gone on in my research and found other things, you know, kind of sparked some memories. So I think that's something that we also need to keep in mind, that talking to living relatives isn't a one and done. You know, it's something that you need to follow up on. Hey, I found this new piece of information. You know, what memories could this spark with these other family members? How about you, Anne?
For me, when I got started, my grandparents had all passed on, and so, you know, I would talk to my dad a little bit, and I would talk maybe to my aunt and uncle on occasion. I didn't see them very often, but I do remember you know, you'd read through the questions. So I asked my dad one time, what's the earliest memory you have? And he was born in 1940, but he says that he can remember, and he must have been fairly young, being with his dad at the butcher shop, and he was talking to the butcher, and they were talking about who they were going to vote for. And my grandfather was, well, it's not good to change horses in midstream, and I can just see him saying that, and he was going to vote for FDR. And you know, it's just, that's one of those interesting things to ask people, right? And then just, so for me it was, you know, what do you remember about your childhood and those kind of things. And then you know, with my aunts and uncles, what do you remember about your parents, that kind of thing. I really wish I had been smart enough when my grandparents were alive to ask them about their parents and ask them about their grandparents and their aunts and uncles and what they remembered. A lot of people in my family don't talk too much about other people, so getting them to talk can be sort of hard. But, you know, if you sort of maybe wrap it around events that were happening instead of people, sometimes I could get them to talk more. So those were the kind of things we talked about.
Yeah, the questions are sometimes the important thing too, and I think a lot of times we ask those really broad questions, you know, like, tell me everything you know about Grandpa, you know, and it's too broad. Sometimes if you ask them something specific, you know, do you know where they lived? Do you know what other family members? Do you remember attending anyone's funeral? And how old were you? Maybe what time of year was it? So that you can kind of maybe estimate a death date based on that. So think about more pointed questions that are going to probably get better results than tell me everything.
Yeah, that never is going to work.
So how do you guys capture a family interview? Do you tape record it? Do you videotape it? Or do you just take notes? What do you think is the best way?
I get it however I can. With my parents, sometimes I have, a very specific purpose. I want to ask them this, and I want to record this story, or I want to record this fact, and I go in with oftentimes with my smartphone. There's like a gajillion different apps, but what happens sometimes is that it's just spontaneous. They'll just start talking, but if I can, I'll also grab my smartphone and I'll just hit record. There's a voice recorder app on my phone, and if I can get to it easily and quickly without, sort of disrupting the flow of them telling the story, I'll get it. Otherwise, if it's one of those spontaneous things, I try to write it down later. Right. So that when I get home, at least jot down a few notes, because right. Who knows when that story is going to pop up again.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then maybe you could share those notes afterwards too, so that people can add to it and comment on it, and circulate the story and get more perspectives on it as well.
Exactly.
And I always kind of felt like sometimes when you pull out the recorder and you deliberately start taping people, sometimes people kind of get nervous and they clam up. It doesn't feel as natural. But it depends, too. My grandmother, you could put a tape recorder in front of her and she'd go on and just keep talking, and the stories would continue to flow. So we were really fortunate with that. Mm-hmm. So what are some good ways to coax the stories out of older family members that, when the details aren't sharp? I talked, like with the cemetery thing, if you went to a funeral, asking people, I've always heard to ask them, what time of year was it? Did you have to wear a coat? And things like that, so that can help you pin down a date. But what other types of questions could help you? Any thoughts?
I think a lot of times people tie things, and I just mentioned this, but tie things to events, right? Mm-hmm. If you can think about, okay, where were you when Pearl Harbor happened or JFK got shot? Or just those are when your brother got married, or those kind of things, because those things tend to stick in people's heads more and helps maybe bring out some stuff. So just tell me everything about your father maybe is not going to be that useful, but
yeah, that's a good point with events, historical events, the things everybody remembers where they were when something happened, and maybe even personal events too.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Or even things like, when did you go? What was your high school like? What did it look like? How did you get to high? Did you have to walk? I imagine most of them did. Those kind of things. Barefoot in snow, right? Always that.
Uphill both ways.
Uphill both ways.
Yeah, exactly. But those kind of little details can actually be quite interesting. Or tell me about a teacher you had, or those kind of things.
Yeah, or I always like to ask, what did they like to do in their spare time? Because I think that's kind of a revealing thing. Did they like to work puzzles, or what did they do? So
that's a great question.
That is.
It kind of tells you something about them.
Yeah, it really does, and I think that both of you have had the great point that asking, well, tell me everything about yourself, or tell me everything about your parents. So often we think of our ancestors as being interesting people, but we don't think of ourselves as being interesting. Oh, I don't have a story.
Yeah.
But I think if we can get into those more specific yet open-ended questions, I think we also run into problems when we ask questions that have a specific answer. If you ask somebody a yes or no question, well, mm-hmm. There's your answer. It's going to be harder to follow up. But if you ask someone, what was your high school education like?
Right.
And I didn't know that when my parents graduated from high school, they had both a commencement and a baccalaureate.
I would not have known that.
Yeah. That the commencement was the awarding of the diploma, but I hope it was the baccalaureate, I think that's the right term, was actually more of a religious ceremony.
Yeah, my brother had that as well.
Yeah, that they had, and this was in a public high school. And of course, this was back in the 40s.
Right.
But that's what they did, and that was something that was completely foreign to me. But asking them, what was your high school graduation like, kind of brought that out.
Yeah, and the things that you wonder about when you find a record, like you find a marriage record for your ancestry and you wonder how they met. I found, I was able to find that information for one of my ancestors in a pension record. It actually told how he met his wife and different things, or a lot of different insights. It talked, going back to what did you do in your spare time, it talked about how he would get together with his old buddies from the Civil War and reminisce. And his widow actually put that in the pension file. So there are
pension records. They're so much better.
But those are the kind of things that you would always wonder about. When you see a record, that marriage record gives you a date, and maybe gives you the witnesses, so that kind of tells you who is important in their lives. But what are the other details? What was that wedding day like? Things like that really a lot of times you can only get when you ask people.
And back then, weddings weren't like they are now, which the overblown extravaganzas, right? I mean, they were just small, and people didn't have ornate wedding dresses. So those things were really different. Another thing that I will ask people is, did you have any pets? Because that usually brings out some sort of story, right? Because people have very fond memories of their pets and those kind of things. So that's another thing that you might consider asking.
Yes, animals always provoke stories too.
Yes.
We all have an animal story, I'm sure.
We all do.
So what do you guys do with an interview once you've got it and it's packaged? What would you do with it afterwards?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ann. Go ahead, Ann.
I usually type it up and then just attach it to the correct person in my family tree maker. That's usually, like I said, I don't have a lot of living people in my family that I can talk to anymore. So for me, I don't get a lot of it recorded, unfortunately.
I'll tell you what though, transcribing it, you really get more out of it too. I've actually gone through and the tape recordings of my grandmother, I've gone through and transcribed them, and going through and hearing word for word, you start catching things and you think about things more. So I think it's really helpful to do that. And if you have notes, I've always, tried to get home as quickly as possible and rewrite them, because I'm usually writing like a maniac and it looks pretty bad.
Right.
It's like, who wrote this garbage? So anyway, but yeah, it's important to, while it's still fresh in your mind, Amy mentioned that earlier, but bears repeating, get those facts down on paper as quickly as you can, and then circulate them. See if everyone else in the family has these same memories. Do they jive with what you've recorded? Because I've had certain things of my grandmother's, but then when you talk to someone else, it wasn't quite as she remembered it, so you get a different perspective.
I've had that. One thing that I've been doing lately is on my own blog on No Story Too Small, is I've been actually sharing some of the family stories either that I remember or that my parents have told me, and a couple of my cousins will contact me later and say, oh yeah, I kind of remember that, but I remember this other little detail differently. And like you say, getting that different perspective from people. So, if it's a story that you're willing to share, with the public, I really recommend blogging it if you're comfortable with that.
I agree.
Yeah. Or you can just share it in a group email too.
Yeah.
A group. Yeah.
Awesome.
I find stuff sometimes and send it out to all of my cousins. Another thing with Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, or whatever holiday it is you're celebrating, it's always, at the table, what is your first Thanksgiving you remember, or what did you all always do, and those kind of things. I mean, even things like, what was your Christmas tree like? Because they're pretty different now, obviously, than they were then. What kind of decorations did you have? What's the first gift you can remember Santa bringing you? What did you guys usually have at Thanksgiving dinner? Those kind of things. I mean, it's those little bitty details that just make it sort of interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. My mom always pulls out the same types of decorations that we've had for years, including at Thanksgiving we have this little wax candle turkey that my sister Trish carved her ABCs in the backup, and every year it's out on the table.
Complete with the carved ABCs.
Yes, exactly. But
That's awesome.
we always remember it, you know, and the stories, the different stories. The year that I had to make the turkey gravy and I messed it up horribly, it was unedible.
Oh no.
So I can, for the record, make turkey gravy now.
Somehow I believe you. You're a good cook.
Yeah, my sisters will, every year they will give me grief, and if I even go near the pot of turkey gravy, I will hear it. So, so are there others outside your family that you've interviewed, or somebody who would you consider interviewing beyond maybe your immediate family? I mean, I would grab anyone I could, but I've never really thought about maybe even talking to old friends of the family.
I had a lady reach out to me because, like Amy suggested, I blog, right? And I would blog about, like, my dad and some of those things. And this lady, her name was Martha Spencer. She lived in Lexington. Unfortunately, she passed away recently. But she found me online, and she just started sending me things. She had little memory of my father. She went to school with him. She was a few years older. But, I mean, she knew things, right? She knew about the high school. She knew about all those things. And by just having a conversation with her, I found out things that were interesting. So, yeah, if you can find people who have those kind of connection, it's fine, right?
Yeah. So reach out to everybody, I guess, would be the moral of the story.
Right. And like Amy said, if you put yourself out there, you're likely to find people.
You know, and you never know what little perspective they're going to have on it. You know, if it's interesting to me how you can have one event, 4 people at the same event, and there are 4 different stories that come out of it. You know, that there's an intersection somewhere, but each person has their own little take on what happened. So, you know, I think it's a great idea to consider reaching out to those family friends and the neighbors and whatnot.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Before we wrap up, I do have one really cool suggestion, and it's so basic. You're probably going to say, Amy, why are you bringing this up? But some people have a really hard time just answering questions, even if it's a nice question like, tell me about your high school graduation. But if you get a photograph, and I'm hoping you can see this.
Yep.
Is that coming through? Okay, so this is my Grandma Johnson, my Aunt Clara, my dad, and my 2 uncles. And this picture was in a stack of pictures that my dad had given me ages ago, and I hadn't really gone through them. And when I came across this picture, I really wasn't sure that it was my grandma, my dad, and my aunt and uncles, because my grandma looked so different. It was a hairstyle that I had never seen her in before. So I took the picture over to Mom and Dad's, and I showed it to Dad, and I said, is this Grandma? And he's like, yeah, that's your grandma. And he paused for a second, and he said, that was taken at the house right before I was burned.
Right before he was burned?
Yeah, my dad was burned when he was a little boy, you know, right after this picture was taken. It was a kitchen fire. And it was one of those stories that us girls growing up, we knew that he had been burned. We never asked him about it.
Sure.
You know, how do you broach the subject?
Awkward, right?
And it was just something that, you know, it was just part of Dad. It wasn't like it was needed to have answered. It was just, you know, it was just part of Dad. And this one picture, he told us, you know, what had happened, told about the 6 weeks that he spent in the hospital.
Wow.
You know, it was a story that I found out because of a question I hadn't asked. But just having this picture and showing it to him, and he just opened up about it. So, you know, get those family photos out.
That's a great idea.
That was, you know, one time that I wish I had my phone next to me, because how Dad told the story was so beautifully told. But
emotional, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No,
That's okay. No, it's a
That's what
power.
we're looking for, right?
Seriously, getting out the photos, and you never know what story is going to come out from a photo. What story is going to come out playing a song that was popular back in the day.
Yeah, or even a record too, something that you've discovered that might prompt a memory of that time, especially now that we have the 1940 census available.
Yeah.
Right. Or what kind of music did you listen to? You know, those kind of things. You never really know. So it's just, yeah. But I think the photo idea, awesome. Awesome idea.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, do you guys have anything else to add? I think this was a really good discussion, and I hope everybody's going to take some of these tips and go on out. And our family is our most precious resource. The people
Right.
have the stories. So go out and make sure you gather them while you can.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you'll see us come back next time, and see us on Between the Leaves. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.